Hello, this is Michelle from the Big Wedding Planning Podcast, and today I would like to talk to you about wedding day transportation. So recently, we received an email from a listener who asked us all about their guest transportation. This is a listener who is getting married at a location where their guests have to stay overnight at a hotel in order to attend their wedding, right? So these guests are either traveling in on trains, planes, automobiles, whatever it is, these guests are going to need to stay overnight. And I don't know how many guests this listener has, but I am going to approximate based on the norm for my clients, okay? So the first question this listener had is, how do we know how many of the guests will use the shuttle service? Mind you, the hotel, she says, is about 30 to 40 minutes away from the venue where the wedding will take place. So for me, a transportation schedule takes about a week or two to create, because I'm constantly making changes to it. So you should know that a transportation schedule is something that doesn't happen quick. Also, the scenario of this listener is such that her guests are staying at one hotel and her wedding ceremony and reception are taking place at one venue. Some of you who are listening might have a bit more of a complex scenario to where maybe there's two hotels that your guests are staying at, and maybe your ceremony is at one venue and your reception is at another venue. That's a whole nother ball game and its own set of complexities. But for purposes of this video and not wanting to take 3 days to explain it to you, I'm gonna go with the easy scenario of one hotel, one venue, let's say 60 guests. So, how do you decipher this far in advance before your wedding how many of those 60 guests are actually going to need the shuttle? Answer, you don't know exactly. You don't. But you do know your guests. And you have an idea, more or less, right? And so if you have called the hotel and set aside a block of 25 rooms, it's likely that, you should set, or rather reserve, enough vehicles for 60 guests, right? Because some of those 25 rooms are couples and maybe some of them are families, right? Or some of them are sharing a room with two couples. So let's just say 60 guests. What's the worst case scenario? I'm going to have 52 guests actually RSVP, and I'm going to have 8 empty seats. No biggie. You still need the same size vehicles. Just a quick note, if you reserve enough vehicle or seating for 60 guests on a vehicle or several vehicles, and you all of a sudden have an RSVP of, let's say, 30, most transportation companies will let you downgrade. But you need to ask that question. You need to ask that question before signing anything or giving your credit card. Okay, so now we have an idea of how we guesstimate how many guests are going to use this transportation. The wedding venue is about 30 to 40 minutes away from the hotel. How many hours do we need these shuttles for? That's a good question. There's a couple of things you need to do. First, you need to get onto Google Maps and input the address of the hotel and the wedding venue, calculate the drive time, and add a little buffer time. The one thing about Google Maps that I like is that they'll usually give you different routes and then also drive time with traffic, like typical traffic. I want you to take whatever the highest drive time is and then add a little bit to it. So let's say Google Maps says, it's going to be anywhere from 33 to 37 minutes. I want you to guess 37 minutes and I want you to round it up to 40 minutes. And that is our buffer time. And buffer time, my friend, is your friend on your wedding day, because buffer time saves our butts, because sometimes things run behind schedule, right? Especially these shuttle buses. They drive a lot slower than you or I drive in our car. So just keep that in mind. Buffer time, very important. The other thing you want to do is create a super mini, I call this a mini wedding day schedule. You want to take those 6 micro events, right? There are normally 6 micro events that most people have occurring at their wedding. And those are ceremony, cocktail reception, dinner or whatever meal you're serving, first dance, cake cutting, and last dance. 6 micro events. When you have those figured out and the approximate time of each, that is going to help you realize how much time you're going to need these vehicles for. Okay? So for this scenario, our ceremony is at 4:30 p.m. And we are approximating that it's going to take 40 minutes for any shuttle vehicle to arrive. Now, do I want my guests arriving at 4:30 p.m.? Do I want 60 guests all arriving at 4:30 p.m. for a 4:30 ceremony? No. No. I actually don't want 60 guests all arriving at the same time, period, because that is just like bottleneck. That is like major like congestion, traffic of people. So it is always my recommendation not to hire a big, huge bus, but rather 2 smaller minibuses. And in this case, for 60 guests, I would highly recommend renting 2 minibuses plus what we call a sprinter. Sprinters usually are about 13 seaters. Minibuses could be a 23-seater or a 27-seater. This depends on the transportation company you're using. But the ideal scenario here for 60 guests is to have 2 minibuses and 1 sprinter. And these 3 vehicles are going to leave at staggered times from the hotel to your ceremony. And if my ceremony starts at 4:30 p.m., I want guests arriving sometime between 4 p.m. and 4:25 p.m. That's the sweet spot. That's what we call prelude time. There's music playing, everything's set up, it looks beautiful, and guests are being seated. So I would suggest a schedule of vehicle number 1 departing the hotel at 3:35 p.m., which makes it an arrival time of 4:15. The next one leaving 5 minutes later. The next one leaving 5 minutes later. So 3:35 p.m. to arrive at 4:15. 3:30 p.m. to arrive at 4:20. And 3:45 p.m. to arrive at 4:25 p.m. This is specific. By the way, I want you to lie to your guests. I do. I want you to lie to them. If your first shuttle is leaving at 3:35 p.m., your guests are going to be told that it is leaving at 3:30 p.m. Why? Because people are notoriously late, or they forget something in the hotel room, or somebody had to use the restroom, whatever it is. So lie to your guests. That's another tip. Another question is from this listener. She says, one of the companies we found will allow us to break up the time we reserve them for. What does she mean by this? Well, most transportation companies will have an hourly minimum. It's either 3 hours or 4 hours. It depends on the transportation company, but they usually are 3 hour minimums. And so if you just have one location for your wedding, you actually can probably break this up into two different blocks of time with your transportation company, provided they allow you to do this. So 3:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m., let's say, sure. And then at the end of the night, here's where that wedding day schedule comes in handy, that mini wedding day schedule. Your guests, some of your guests, will want to leave earlier than others. It's inevitable. It happens to everyone. And it really depends on a few things. How old your guests are, whether or not your guests have little ones like children, whether they be at the wedding or at the hotel waiting for them or whatever. Even if the kids aren't with them and they're getting a weekend away, if these are parents with young children, they're going to want to take advantage of the weekend. Okay. So they might want not stay till your last dance. Who knows? So the cake cutting time is really important because after the cake is cut and served, that is the cue for a lot of older guests and guests with young children to leave. They don't want to wait till the last dance. They're not big dancers. They're tired. They've had their cake and their coffee and they're ready to go. So if cake cutting is at 9 p.m., your first shuttle is probably going to be departing around 9:30. And all three of those shuttle buses should be sitting at your wedding waiting, ready to go. The first one leaving at 9:30 and not getting to the hotel until 40 minutes later, which is a little after 10 o'clock. And then if it's going to go back to your wedding, it's going to get there in time for the people who have joined that last dance, right? If our last dance is at 10:30, people are going to grab their stuff. They're going to kiss. They're going to say goodbye. Oh my, I love you. This was amazing. Thank you so much. They're going to be getting onto that shuttle around 10:40, 10:45. So that first shuttle that left at 9:30, it's going to get to the hotel at 10:10, and it's going to get back to you around 10:45, 10:50. So it's perfect timing. So this allows you to provide one, maybe two shuttles prior to that last dance. So yes, that is your transportation schedule in a nutshell. But let me be clear. We spend an entire lesson on this in the Big Wedding Planning Masterclass. Chapter 2, Lesson 4 is a video and tutorial and template all about transportation and how to figure this out. So if yours is a wedding that the ceremony is happening at one place, the reception's happening in another, there's one or two hotels, you've got a huge group of people, trust me, you're going to want to watch Chapter 2, Lesson 4, where I go into this in way more detail. But hopefully this is helpful for you, and congratulations and happy planning.